Hey everybody, welcome back. So today I thought we'd do a sample Salesforce developer job interview. And the reason I've been meaning to make this video for a while, just because I have never been very happy with any of the kind of interview guides that I feel like I've seen on the internet. In my opinion, they tend to be very heavy on stuff that can easily be Googled. And if you're a developer, right, I don't feel like that's that's why Google exists, right? Not so you can memorize every single, method on the string class or something. And I think they also tend to be, I always felt like they're more designed for people that may occasionally write a line of code. And I thought there's a lot of stuff that was maybe more in the admin body of knowledge. Process builders, validation rules, that really, if as a developer, in my opinion, aren't going to, you need to know what they are, but they're not going to really land on your plate on a day-to-day basis. So I wanted to talk about things that I think, that these are interview questions that I do if I'm interviewing somebody to join the team as a junior developer. And we're going to also focus a lot on things, and this is what I talk about a lot, they're like PD1 or even PD2. These are just steps in your journey. There's tons of things you need to know that are not covered in either of those. And so today a lot of what we're going to do today, right, is we're going to have code that works, but it's hot garbage, and we're going to figure out how to make it better. Because I think code standards and clean code are an essential part of being an effective developer on this platform. And I'm looking over at my bookshelf. I'll be right back. I'm back. If you don't have this book, you should. It should be on your shelf. It should be on the shelf of every developer, in my opinion, on the planet. You will become a much, much better programmer for knowing it. And enough said. Get this book, Clean Code by Bob Martin. All right, so let's hop into the code. As I said earlier, right, this is all. We're going to open up IntelliJ with the Illuminated Cloud plugin. I'm saying because people are always sending me messages like, hey, what editor do you use? I am using Illuminated Cloud, the Rolls Royce of Salesforce development tools. It is paid, but worth every penny, in my opinion. Fix that one. All right, so as I said, I have here, we're going to look at an interview class and an interview test class. This code works. But as I said, it's just trash. I would not hire somebody that wrote code like this. So we're going to do this first method called I hate myself for even having written this code. And take a minute, pause your, I'm going to fold that one up. Go ahead, pause me if you want. Take a look at this code. Figure out how you'd make it better. It works if we ran it right now, but I'm going to stress a lot, and this is something from Bob Martin, it's not enough that code works. And this would also fail under certain conditions. It works under certain conditions, would fail under others. So go ahead, pause, take as long as you need. Take a look at this, see if you can figure out how you might make this first method better. There are many, many things that can be improved at it. All right, so if you have paused and you're back now, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name, right? This name doesn't tell. So the name of your method should tell you like what that method does, right? So you know what? So this method, and I'm going to have that this is something you would see in clean code. So we have a comment up here. This method is designed to it's designed to update contacts, contact description values. For the most part, we shouldn't write comments on our code. Our code should be self-explanatory. Our code should tell us what we're writing. So let's get rid of that. Shift F6, and I'm going to call this update contact description. Hey, look, now we just have a method name that I think that makes it pretty clear what this method does. Let's get rid of that comment up there. Every time I switch over to, I can't remember all my hotkeys. So we don't need that comment anymore, right? Because now our code tells us what it does. All right. Next thing is, so we've got our SOQL query here, list contacts, cons. First of all, once again, I don't like the name of that. There is not a hard and fast rule here, but I'm going to call this my contact list, okay? If I'm creating any sort of a collection, I like to use set, list, map, whatever in the name, so other developers can see what it is, and it tells you a little bit more. You get a little bit more. If you see this data type, you have a little more idea what's going on. Okay, next thing. This is a big pet peeve of mine. In this case, it's a SOQL query, but any line of code that goes on and on and on, like this, because I'm on a 32-inch screen, I can still see most of it, but I'm on a laptop, I would be scrolling to the right forever to see what was in there. Don't make people do that. Don't make yourself do that. In this case, for SOQL, and this is my own personal convention, I like to separate it every 3 fields, or something like that, but you should have some sort of a delimiter here on whatever editor you're using. And that's going to, you shouldn't cross that boundary. That should say, hey, this line of code is getting too long. And this can be adjusted, for different editors, but don't write code that you've got to scroll forever to the right to read one line of code. You got an enter key. Use your enter key. All right, so select. So we made that. We made that better. Contact list, select ID. Okay, so I think that's okay. From contact. I think that's fairly clean. And now, so let's go down to the next line. For contact C in contact list. This is the one rare place where I think single letter variables are acceptable, is inside for loops like this. Mostly because I think it's kind of a developer convention. That we as developers, we know what that means. So here's the big one that was this is Salesforce specific, just bad practice. And this should be something like developer, 101, right? I've got DML inside my for loop, right? So that's going to throw an error on any sort of bulk action, right? We're going to exceed the number of DML statements allowed. So if like a trigger, because a trigger can pass 200 records, and boom, this is going to fail. If we're doing one record, it's going to work fine all day, but all your code should be bulkified. I'm going to steal that. I think Dan Appleman talks about that in his book, Advanced Apex Programming. All of your code should be bulk code, no exceptions. So again, if you need to for a second, pause and think about how you would fix, and if you missed that, how we might fix and bulkify this loop. And I'm going to, if you pause, so we're going to come back. So what I'm going to do, I'm up top right here. I'm just going to create a new list. Contact. I'm going to call it contacts to update. What do I do with that? Okay. All right. So now I've got a collection, right? I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to get rid of that horrendous DML statement inside a for loop. I'm going to say contacts to update dot add C, right? And then I'm going to update contacts to update, right? And I think anybody can come along, you can read this method, and you get a pretty easy idea of what it does. Last thing I would add in, so I made this originally a SOQL query too long to drive home the original point of code scrolling too far to the right. But the other thing I would give you bonus points for if you called me out on this is I'm querying 8 fields here in my query, but I'm using 1. I only need the description field. So why am I getting 8 fields when I only need 1, right? So anyway, boom, let's get rid of all of that. Let's select description from contact. That's way more efficient. We don't ever query data from the database that we don't need. All right. So that is, I think, a pretty significant improvement to our first class. Next thing, so I'm going to fold this one up. I'm going to expand that one. Oh. All right. I had something for another video in there that I deleted real quickly. And so now we've got our second method. Update contact description, or pardon me, update accounts is the method we're looking at right now. So again, pause for a second, and I want this, this method is supposed to be used as a controller for Lightning Web Component. So that's one of the things you need to look at on this. Maybe one of the few things in here you could actually probably just Google. Pause, take a look at this, and see what we can do to make it better. Again, code runs, does what it's supposed to do. Well, it wouldn't if we tried to use it from a Lightning Web Component, but otherwise it does what it's supposed to do. All right, you paused, you're back. So if we want to use a method in a Lightning Web Component, we need to do @Aura enabled. Now, here's something I might pause if we're doing an interview and ask you about. And again, this is probably one of the few things that you could Google, but would we want to add cacheable equals true into this? And I'm going to say for this one, no, we do not. Right, so this is cacheable equals true. And this will compile, but the problem is there's DML in here. And you cannot, so this will fail when we actually connect it to a Lightning Web Component. So bonus if you realize that. You cannot use cacheable equals true if there's DML. All right, let's get rid of that. All right, so update accounts, list account A1. We don't ever write single or like a variable like name A1, right? We want this to be useful to other developers, right? So how about we call this accounts to update, right? So it's going to take in a list. Well, isn't that so much better than A1, which doesn't tell anybody anything? Same thing. I named a list here, A2, and we'll call this accounts. Since I already used accounts for to update, we'll just say accounts for DML. All right. So now I have to refactor a couple things here because I did it poorly. I should have just used the refactor hotkey that, as you saw earlier, that Illuminated Cloud provides for account A in accounts to update. We're going to say accounts description, and then we are going to accounts for DML. We're going to add that in. Okay, and then update that. Update accounts for DML. Okay, so down here at the bottom, this is a pretty critical error in my opinion. And this kind of goes back, like this code runs, it compiles, it does everything we want it to do. We have a try catch block here, and nothing happens when we catch. So if this does fail for some reason, it's just going to fail silently. Nobody's going to know about it, which is not what a try catch block is for. A try catch block is so you can gracefully handle an error in a way of your choosing. So really, you should have some sort of a centralized error handling framework. In this case, right, we're just going to log it to the debug log. We'll say get stack trace string. Okay. So let's just take a look at this, right? Make sure. So we've got our Aura enabled, update accounts. We made our parameter actually useful. We changed our collection variable name to something useful. Account A and accounts to update, a.description equals updated. And then we added something into our catch block. So again, as you can see, and I keep trying to drive home this point, right? This code all worked before, but it was really bad. You couldn't, and it was very hard to read it and figure out what it even did. So hopefully, like, this is much more understandable now, much more self-documenting. And maybe the one technical aspect is if you are going to use a try-catch block, you must actually handle the exception. You can't just let it fail silently. Terrible practice, and it will cause you all kinds of problems that will be very hard to discover because you've got things that are just failing silently. And now let's move on to writing some tests. Let's test our code. And you know what? First off, I'm gonna run interview class test with coverage just to see what we get back. Okay, so we have 13 of 16 lines covered. And the one I think I'm not going to worry about today is, this is a whole different separate topic, is using try-catch blocks in unit tests. And there's lots of different ways, different philosophies on how we go about that. So we are actually not going for 100% code coverage. And again, I'm going to stress this, and maybe you mentioned this would probably be definitely bonus points from me if you talk about this in an interview. We don't write tests for code coverage. We write tests to make sure our code works, right? All right, so let's go back to our test class. Get rid of that. And so first, we have a test setup, and you should know what those are, how to use one of those. And so let's fold that. So we've got our first one, and this is really the one we're going to talk about. We've got our test account update, right? And as you just saw, I'm going to run this one. We'll run it again. Test passes, and it is nonetheless hot garbage. And tests are one of the most important things to do and to understand as a developer. So again, I'll throw a maybe for your own knowledge. Like, this may be a time where in an interview we might also talk about, are these really unit tests? Are they integration tests? What's the difference? But for right now, let's just make this test method something a little bit better. Okay, so we have got all we're going to do here, right? So in our test setup method, we created our test data up here. So now we are just getting an account. We're getting accounts into a collection. So so first thing I'm going to add in is I'm going to show you start test and test.stop test. And you know what, I should have told you to pause earlier and fix this, but I didn't. So I think we're going to keep driving on anyway. All right, so, and I'm going to say, to me, this is a good practice, is to always use test.start, test.stop. So first, the reason, and you should know this as a developer, is one, they just give you a new set of governor limits. So if you've used a bunch of governor limits, maybe earlier setting up test data, test.start, test.stop give you a new fresh set for just that test. I also like them just as a visual indicator of, like, hey, this is what we're actually testing. What we're actually testing is the update accounts method in the interview class. Like, this is just setup stuff up here. This is the logic that we're going to test. Okay, now, most importantly is we did not write an assertion. And this is another thing, to me, non-negotiable. If you don't call this out in an interview that a unit test or a Salesforce test method does not have an assertion, I would tongue-tied, but because I was so mean saying I wouldn't want to hire you, but I wouldn't. I mean, that's just essential. And again, that we understand we write tests to make sure our code works, not to get code coverage. I kind of cringe when people ask, like, what's our code coverage? Because it's a step away from being a totally meaningless thing, right? So let's do assert equals, and we wanted You know, what is this? I forgot. Okay, so updated description is what it changes it to. So we expect that the value of the account description field will be updated description. And you know what, I'm going to hop up here because we actually also need to get an account after the method ran to test that. So we're going to say account updated account equals, I'm going to say select description from account one. And this is one of the few times where I think it's acceptable to write a SQL query just on one line like that. And if you are using these in unit tests, make sure, right, and you're assigning it to a variable like that you do a limit 1, because if it tries to, if someday, for whatever reason, this test tries to run and assign, right, because you just have a variable here, you don't have a collection, that's going to fail. So now we're going to say updated account dot description. So what we're going to write, we should be able to explain, well, this is what I expect. This is what the reality is. This is what actually came back. And I feel, again, best practice. You have a third argument that you can use here that is just a message. And I believe that we should make use of that. So we're going to say expected to be updated. And let me see, anything else? And we're going to run this in a second, but another thing I'm going to introduce, and this is actually, I believe Martin Fowler is the guy that kind of was his convention, but another nice thing to do in a unit test, in my opinion, is one of the few times I think comments are okay, given. When, then. That unit tests follow a given, when, then pattern. Right? So we're saying, like, given, right, this account, when we run this test method, then we expect to do that. So I think one of the rare times I think comments are good and useful is putting them in your test methods to show this pattern. And, the given, when, then. Because that every good test should follow that pattern, that design pattern of given, when, then. All right, let's compile this. And something didn't compile. Void update. That is probably, so I'm getting a failure. Let's go down here to something we're not even going to, so I'm just going to comment this out because we're not even going to do this one. This is, if you remember earlier, I refactored a method signature. And this is actually something good to be aware about, is because test methods, test classes are not truly like dependencies on. So when you refactor, editors tend not to pick that up. So if I had other actual like production code that was using that method that was, and I changed it to update contact, whatever, Illuminated Cloud would handle all that for me. Unit tests tend to be something you do. I just have to physically go in and touch and make the updates. All right, so let's try to compile that again. And let's run our test method. Awesome. Best practice, and these are other things you should be aware of, and we should just do some videos on unit tests, right? We would actually want to write another test that fails, right? To make sure that if we that it's not doing, you want to write a positive case and a negative case. In this case, we're just writing a positive one, and in the future we'll do actual videos on unit tests. This is just a job interview video, but as I'll say, best practice, and Trailhead I think does a great job explaining this, but you want positive cases, negative cases, and bulk unit tests all the time. Super important. So anyway, I hope this was useful. If it was, please hit like and subscribe if you made it all the way to the end of this. And I will see you in the next video. Everybody, please stay curious, keep on learning, and just get 1% better every day. And I'll see you in the next one.